Good evening. Welcome back to the Guerrilla Medic channel. I'm your host, Jay. Feels kind of weird to say that. Usually this is done on a podcast, but I figured we would just do this as a video and get it out to you guys. I'd done a whole video on this, and it didn't, it was okay. And then the events with Charlie Kirk had happened, and it kind of gave me some more stuff to chew on. So we're going to redo it for you guys, and I'm going to try and just do this as one take and just blast it out to you guys with no editing. So you guys got the law enforcement only balaclava. Thanks a lot, Arcteryx, by the way. So I was talking with a guy who had come through class at the clinician I had at 3 Aces PSAC over in Spokane Valley. And we were kind of shooting some ideas back and forth, talking a bit, and realized that I've kind of talked about how guerrilla medicine, but never why. And I thought I had explained the why behind it. I'm usually pretty target focused on the why of things. I usually think if people understand the why, they can kind of wrap their head around the whole concept. So apparently I haven't done a good job of that, so I'm here to try and rectify that. Let's kind of walk it back to the beginning. When I chose the moniker of the Guerrilla Medic, I did that kind of intentionally. When I looked up the meaning of guerrilla, spelled like the Sandinista guerrillas, the thing that caught my eye is it wasn't necessarily the first definition of it when you look up like a Merriam-Webster definition, but like the second or third. And kind of gave a definition, and then doing so without the authorization of authority. And I was like, that's exactly what I want. Doing so without the authorization of authority. We are going to care for our patients, our families, our loved ones, our friends, our crew, our tribe, whatever you got, with or without the authorization of authority. We're going to do the best we can to get the skills. We're going to do the best we can to rip a line off the guy over at Viking Preparedness. Do the best we can with what we got and where we're at, right? So that's how I, kind of approach this guerrilla medicine topic. There are guys like Euromedics do a phenomenal job of kind of talking about higher level guerrilla medicine. More of the true paramedic or nurse, PA, MD level of how that would look, what our interventions would be. There's a lot of great pages, great channels that teach to that. But that's not my niche. What I try to stick to is, the average American citizen, and maybe people who've kind of started to dabble in medicine, or EMTs, or somewhere in that kind of range, right? Like you've got some knowledge under your belt, but you're not a provider, right? So that's kind of where the Guerrilla Medic page and everything is kind of focused on. So the why with it is that we're just going to do this without the authorization of authority if needed. I've talked about this on, I think it was like the intro podcast to the Guerrilla Medic. During COVID, there was a period where we had executives coming in from, their cushy corporate offices, and they were kind of getting the temperature of the room and talking about, how would you guys feel if we denied services to people who didn't want to get COVID shots? And, at the time, young, brash man that I was, I'm like, how about you go fuck yourself, right? Like, I've been, punched, spit on, choked by, crackheads off the street, and we still care for those guys. So if a family just chooses not to do this, like, we're not going to take care of them. So after that, I was kind of heated, and I ended up in a supply room, looking for something. And I kind of heard a hushed conversation in the corner of, I think it was a provider, and it was an NP, a nurse, and maybe a rad tech or something like that. But they were talking, kind of in a hushed tone, and I went over, and I'm like, hey, what's going on? And we were all kind of along the same lines with that. And what they were talking about was like, well, how do we care for them if they deny services through X, insert X company? And I was like, well, what do you mean? How do we care for them? And they're like, well, do we run this out of our basement? Do we, rent a commercial space to see these patients? And I was like, holy shit. In my head, I'm like, this is guerrilla medicine happening in front of me. And this is kind of what spurred me kind of creating the channel and stuff. But it was like, I'm seeing the origins of guerrilla medicine in the United States. And everything, we had lockdowns and all that stuff, but everything was relatively functioning, right? Like, it didn't take much for us to have to resort to some kind of, potentially underground medicine. And it was met with enough that the whole, let's not see patients that didn't get COVID shots, met so much resistance that it didn't end up coming to fruition. But we had people organically coming up with, well, we can use X account to order supplies. We can use X lab to run the labs. We can do, we can go here for imaging. We can do these things, these workarounds. And watching that, I was like, there are good people out there that even when their backs are up against the wall, they will do anything and everything they can for their patients. And they will take care of these people with or without the authorization of authority. So that's where the whole moniker of Guerrilla Medic came from, right? Because we were a part of this process. We were mapping out suppliers and stuff. But that's where it comes from. So the why of guerrilla medicine, why do people care, right? It sounds, I think it sounds cool, right? I'm kind of biased. But I think that the average American citizen should care about this to some extent. We'll kind of touch on this later in the video, but there is a myriad of reasons why you can't access professional medical services. I believe that it is your responsibility, especially now in 2025, you have to be much more of an active participant in your own healthcare, in your family's healthcare, in your child's healthcare than ever before. You really do. And not so much because you have to do more of it yourself, but there are nefarious influences impacting decisions that, try and put this as delicately as possible, there are outside influences that impact the type of care that you receive, right? Whether that be big pharma, that's just a whole rabbit hole to go down, but that's a large part of it. Agencies that may not align with true evidence-based medicine, but they may say that, trust the science, when the science isn't actually saying that, right? We've seen some of that. You just need to be informed. So what I try to focus on here is things for the average person, or maybe, a step or two above. So when we talk about this, I think you need to be able to do the best you can with what you have and where you're at. Again, stealing from Viking preparedness, credit where it's due. I'm going to stop saying that if I say it again. But you really need to function to the best of your ability with the supplies you have on hand. So I try and lean into, what supplies to keep on hand for these things. A lot of this comes down to making friends. You really need to make friends with people that work in healthcare. And if you work in healthcare, I've said this from the beginning, if someone more qualified than me comes along and starts speaking on this topic, I am more than happy to shut up, take a seat, and listen, and take notes, right? But until that happens, I'm going to keep putting out what I can. So if you work in healthcare, that's my challenge to you. That's my nut and fancy OG call to action. If you work in healthcare, if you're a nurse, you're a PA, NP, provider, whatever, try and get those around you. Try and help them see the light. I think that nurses should recruit nurses, providers should recruit providers, rad techs, so on and so forth. But kind of help open their eyes, because a lot of times in healthcare, we get this us versus them kind of mentality. Someone comes in and they tell us, I kind of looked up some of my symptoms. This is what I think it is. Most of the time, we're like, oh, Jesus Christ, it's Dr. Google here, And then, I'm a nurse and I know what I'm doing. That's kind of bullshit. I mean, patients now have access to the same, if not better, information than healthcare does. So get your colleagues on board with this. If something comes up in conversation, kind of make a point oh yeah, I could definitely see how that could go sideways. What do you think? And tease that out of them. Like, pour a little bit of gasoline on that fire. Let them run with it. See where it goes. Because I've done that with, other people, and they have now the seed has been planted. So if God forbid something like, 2020 happens again, it's not the first time they've heard this, and they're kind of more likely to take the side of the patient and truly be that patient advocate. Right? You take that, the Hippocratic Oath or whatever kind of oath you take, do no harm, right? You're supposed to be your patient's advocate. So if you're in healthcare, it is your responsibility to advocate for your patients and take the best care of them that you can. I would submit to you that as a citizen, and if you have if you're in a community, like a true community, cities I don't really think count because there's just millions of people and nobody knows anyone. But if you're in a smaller town, especially, these people, right? They truly are a community, and you need to look out for them. So I'm gonna hop off that tiny high horse here. I got notes for you guys. So when we talk about why guerrilla medicine, I just gave you some examples, but I'll try and touch on some of the examples that I had from that previous video that I'm like, let's not do that. Disruption of services is really what it comes down to. It doesn't matter if, let's say you're in the backcountry, right? I'm not the search and rescue guru or anything like that, but let's say you're in the backcountry. That is a disruption of services, generally speaking. Now we have in-reaches and stuff like that to help us communicate, but you're more or less on your own for quite a bit of it until they show up, right? So that is, that's kind of austere care. Austere kind of gets thrown around a bit into this in this community. So when I say austere care, I generally refer to an environment that's lacking people, resources, or equipment. So if you're in the backcountry, man, you're pretty much lacking all three of those. So that's an example of it. Power outages, storms. Up here in Idaho, people die every year because EMS is physically not able to get to their calls for service. Right? Like the snow is just too deep. They cannot physically walk the 3 miles of driveway or whatever to the patient's house. So some kind of a disruption of services. Now we can go from winter storm and maybe like a localized power outage or a road is out, something like that. That is, on this side is much more likely to happen, much more likely to impact you, but it's kind of short term, right? All the way up to now, the hot topic recently, unfortunately, in the United States is, civil war or, war abroad, right? How is that going to impact us? Cyber attacks, how do the cyber attacks impact healthcare? Well, if they cripple the medical record system, we have no access to what meds you're on. We have a hard time communicating in hospitals without the internet. So cyber attacks on hospitals, that's going to cripple medical care. Absolutely cripple it. So you've got your, low frequency, high impact. I forget the name for it. Like low likelihood, high impact, something like that. Like high likelihood, moderate to, about moderate impact. And that's kind of where we live with guerrilla medicine. So if, a road got washed out, bad snowstorm, stuff like that, I advocate for you being able to manage like a flu at home. Right. As always, disclaimer, you should go through professional medical services first. This is just hypotheticals that you could do on your own if you're not able to access them. Right. So basically being able to do urgent care stuff at home, managing cold and flus, doing some wound cleanouts, laceration repairs, splinting. It's pretty basic care that they do in urgent care, right? They patch you up and they get you on your way. I don't think that it's a realistic expectation to be able to do like high-level trauma care at home. I just don't. So I don't really go that way with it. when we talk about, the frequency of events right now in the U.S., you've got winters coming, so you're going to have your snowstorms. You've got your fires, your floods, localized outbreaks of disease. All those things are likely to happen at some point in some region of the U.S. pretty much every year. So being able to kind of take care of your own for those type of events. As we get further down that paradigm, I think that's the right word. I went to community college, so I apologize if it's not. Civil unrest, any kind of civil unrest, right? We saw a good bit of it during COVID. We may, for all I know, see a little bit right now. Probably won't up here because nobody lives up here, but in the cities, you might see some of this. But I like civil unrest because it's kind of that self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Your event, your whatever catalyst, your trigger event, it happens. People get scared, and they get mad, and they lash out. Then they make things unsafe, and then that causes more fear, more anger, more lashing out, wash, rinse, repeat, right? If people don't feel safe, they're not going to go to work. So let's work down to the notes. Fragility of the system. Logistics. That's a big one. Just-in-time logistics. Hospitals, clinics, everybody runs on just-in-time logistics. There's a certain par that we keep, and once it hits a certain level of that par, supplies is almost automatically reordered, or whoever does your ordering reorders. Now, I've worked in very large hospitals, and there is not a ton of supplies in there. It seems like there is, but after you clean it out for if you get back-to-back traumas or something, there's really not a lot. They've got a couple of rooms for very large ER, and then you've got central processing and stuff like that to sterilize your instruments. Just-in-time logistics, if there is something that goes wrong, if a bolt falls off on a tire, or like a lug falls off on a tire of a semi that was delivering supplies, that's not delayed. Care is delayed. So little things can impact your just-in-time logistics. Is better for their bottom line, which is why they do it, but not great for overall sustainability of the hospital. Supply manufacturing. So we saw some of this during Helene. I think it was Baxter, one of the companies that does IV bags, was impacted in the flooding. It was almost impossible to order IV bags. Like, we were ordering from companies that I've never really heard of, and they looked weird. And they were way more expensive. I personally ordered a box of IV fluids that was like 4 times what they normally were. Supply and demand. That's a part of it, right? Increase prices for the goods if you can get them. Infrastructure. We look at storms and things like that. Like, if the buildings aren't safe, they're not going to let people inside. From a liability standpoint, they don't want people getting hurt. They don't want buildings collapsing on people. If the building is unsafe, you can't go in. They may try to do some kind of mash tents or something like that, but it's not the same as inside the hospital. So, be able to take care of some of that stuff yourself. Don't expose yourself to that risk. Power failures, stuff like that. Like, the hospitals, clinics, they run on generators. But, those, for the most part, there is a type of fueling that generator, whether it's gasoline, LNG, whatever. Something is fueling those. And if that stops flowing, or, there's an issue with the generator, that's down. If you can't make electricity, if you can't generate electricity, your heating and cooling systems are down. The hospital's boiling. You can't get oxygen. You can't run your vents, things like that. That is catastrophic for these facilities. We kind of touched on it earlier. Impassable or unsafe roads. Like, if EMS can't get to you, they can't take you to the hospital, right? If you can't physically drive in for whatever reason, whether it's something common like a storm or civil unrest. Timmy cut himself, playing with his new knife or whatever. It was it's a laceration. We'll need some stitches. But are we going to risk going to the urgent care in town and driving through 30, 40 pissed off people with Molotov cocktails? Hell no. I'm going home. I'm going to sit your ass up at home. Capacity. A lot of people don't think of capacity. Hospitals operate, the ones I've worked at, operate at near capacity almost every day. Like there are some that are designated like you can't go on divert. Most of them, though, are at or near capacity. So their ability to handle a massive influx of patients is really not there. And the care you get is going to be subpar. It's not like, what's that ER show that just came out with? The Pit. Like, they're not ready for a mass cow every day. There are some that, will handle it better. But I've been a part of mass cows. I have moved patients to, from hallway beds, and we're sending people down to, urgent care or family practice from the ED. It's a cluster, even at the highest levels of trauma. It is a cluster. Let's talk on governing bodies. Dysfunction of local, county, state, and Fed. If you were involved in Helene in any capacity, I did go down there for a little bit and do some relief efforts. Nothing wild, but seeing the dysfunction between the branches of government was bananas. Seeing that firsthand. Medically speaking, like I went there to help medically. There are so many loopholes and things you have to jump through, hoops to jump through for licenses, right? Like if you're from the West Coast, it doesn't necessarily mean that your license is going to be accepted on the East Coast without applying for whatever, like a North Carolina, we'll say nursing license, for example. Like it does, if you have a California nursing license, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to accept it over in North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, wherever. So there was a lot of people there that were willing to help that had current credentials. They just weren't credentialed in the area. And due to liability, like a lot of people got turned away. So something to think of, hamstrung by legalities. Personnel. Man, personnel, that is an interesting one. During COVID, like the first weeks of COVID, like where I was at doing urgent care stuff, like we got one, if not the first positive COVID test positive COVID patient in the area. It was a pretty big area back then. But employees were not coming to work. They were calling out of work because it was getting blown out of proportion on the news and whatnot. But they're like, I don't have food to feed my family because we're going to do the lockdowns or whatever. I need to leave and not be at work today to go to the grocery store and buy food for my family. And that happened quite a bit in the beginning. Like, where's let's pick Susan. Like, where's Susan? Oh, well, she went to Costco today because she didn't have any toilet paper or, basic necessities for her family. So she called out of work with an increasing patient volume, more stress on us that are there, so that she can go and feed her family. As she should, but she should have had stuff ahead of time, right? That's where the whole prepping thing comes in. But people will always take care of their families before your family. Employees getting sick. Employees get sick too. Even the best nurses get sick. Especially, when you have a high influx of sick patients, cold and flu season every year. It's, it's almost October now. People are getting the crud. Kids go back to school, right? On a regular year. That's nothing to say, if you have a true pandemic. So, employees get sick too. When they get sick, they call out. That creates additional strain on the employees that are there. Those people are now getting overworked, usually less sleep, wearing down their immune system. They become more susceptible. They call out. The cycle goes round and round and round and round. Employees quit. Like we had quite a few employees where I was working quit at the time because of COVID. Whether they, we had some quit initially because they were scared, they were older, and they're like, hey, I'm retirement age anyway. I'm out. I'm not dealing with this. They quit because of stress. They would quit because of fear. They would quit because of family members. Then when the vaccine started coming out, people quit because of mandates. employees quit. They're just regular people. We all have jobs, right? There are certain things that you'll quit your job over. Healthcare is no different. So if everyone's quitting, you know, the line at the urgent care, your family practice to be seen for your cold and flu or whatever, you know, it may be ridiculous. Like I've had urgent cares where the wait was like 6+ hours, right? Like now you're starting to get into the guerrilla medicine thing. Can we go home? Can we just treat this at home? Right? People are people. They're going to do what they need to do for themselves and their families. But employee deaths, man, those wreak havoc on the morale, and that directly ties into calling out and quitting. Right? If you have someone who's been there for a long time, and you know, if it's a pandemic and they succumb to the pandemic, or you know, really whatever reason, employees dying is terrible for morale. And then you just keep triggering that cycle. You know, people quitting, more stress, working themselves to death in some cases. But yeah, employees, there's your big factor, right? When you're on the leadership side, employees are your most valuable asset. You know, you have your customer, your patient. Yes, absolutely. But if I have no one to service them, it's kind of for naught. Touching with the quitting, we kind of just mentioned it. Not agreeing with policies. Overreach. You have staff that don't abide by policy, whether, you know, whoever's team is in office gets to control what policy is going on, right? But if staff don't abide by policies, or policies are being abused by management, they quit. Getting back to the quitting. Patients that don't abide by policies. You know, if you've got a local outbreak of whatever and you ask people to wear a mask, and no, I'm not going to do that, right? And that's just like that's a flashpoint, especially here in Idaho. Flashpoint. Not necessarily for medical reasons, but just a compliance issue. People are just like, no, I'm not doing that. Don't care. I'll die. Okay. All right. You know, that kind of leads to like your staff and your patient conflicts. Like, am I going to sit waiting to be seen with my kid? When people are like screaming at each other, fighting each other, like, hell no, I'm leaving. Goodbye. First sign of that, I'm gone. We'll take care of this at home. You start to get your tribalization at the workplace as well. Idaho is not a friendly state. I will say that. My wife is native. I am not a native. Idaho is not a friendly state. If you got out-of-state plates, you're getting flipped off. You're getting cut off. People are tailgating you. Like, just bad time all around. But the tribalization, like, people break off into their own camps. COVID is a great example. But like, people were not helping employees were not helping other employees based on how they felt about COVID and what team they're on. So you may have full staffing, but they're not working together. They have tribalized. So again, that is just degrading the care you're going to get and how long you're going to wait. I failed in my mission. We're not able to do this in a one take, so I'll stitch this in with it. But all this to say, like, if you don't have to go to any of these facilities during these times of crisis, it's much better. So let's look at some of the things that you may be looking at. Let's say there is some kind of a grid down or a disruption of services, right? So we kind of categorize this hours to days, days to weeks, weeks to months, and then whatever zombie apocalypse you live in with years. Hours to days, like things you're going to be seeing. What do I need? Like, why guerrilla medicine? We kind of just touched that. But like, you know, what am I going to need to know? Hours to days. Acute injuries. You get your like lacerations and traumas, violent crime, musculoskeletal like sprains, strains, heat, cold exposure. Those are definitely problems. You know, every year, I've seen pretty much every year I've lived in Idaho, I've seen someone with some degree of frostbite in the winter. We look at those like the acute injuries, right? Things aren't working, gas pumps aren't working, you get flashpoints, you end up with your violent crime and trauma. That's how I'm kind of getting these things. Other things that you'll see, like during Helene, running out of oxygen. That was a big thing, getting out to patients. A lot of dudes were flying out in helicopters to get to some of these hollers where roads just didn't exist anymore and you couldn't really get back there. But running out of oxygen was a pretty big issue. Refrigeration issues, especially drugs, like insulin. Being able to maintain temperatures on those. Anaphylaxis, getting stung by a bee, right? If there's no EMS to call and you get stung by a bee and you're anaphylactic, like, it's your day, man. I hope you got EpiPens and Benadryl and all sorts of stuff to be able to deal with that. Your asthma, your COPD exacerbations, trying to carbon monoxide poisoning, so burning, starting some heaters inside. House fires, cardiac arrests due to like overexertion. Right? If you're 400 pounds and you're having to chop some wood for the first time in 40 years, that is a recipe for disaster, man. Cardiac arrests are going to skyrocket anytime there's a grid down kind of a scenario. House fires, big thing. Cooking inside, more candles at night, things that we typically don't have to deal with. And then fire departments that can't get there. You're your own fire department at that point. So, diseases, things like waterborne illnesses. Drinking bad water, even when the lights are on, everything's working, Netflix is streaming, is already pretty uncomfortable. Just having to crap yourself all the time, trying to rid yourself of these pathogens. But dirty water. And I've gone on quite a bit of a soapbox here on dirty water in the past, and I'll probably do some videos on it. But waterborne illnesses kill untold amounts of people every year, even in 2025. Days to weeks. Poor hygiene. You're starting to get, you're living in these clothes more, you're not washing them as much, you're not washing your body as much. You're looking at like fungal and bacterial infections, rashes, bugs, scabies, lice, things like that are going to start cropping up. Running into your respiratory illnesses. Flu is seasonal. COVID, believe whatever you want about COVID. Doesn't really seem to have a strict season anymore. Like, you get positive COVIDs in May and July and all throughout the year. But respiratory illnesses. Days to weeks, you're looking at like running out of medications, coming off of SSRIs, SNRIs, cold turkey. You're looking at running out of the rest of your antipsychotic meds, cold turkey, pain medication. A lot of violent crime is going to result from trying to get pain medication. We don't really have too much of an issue with it here in the U.S., in the developed areas at least. Tuberculosis. That's usually a disease that's transmitted more amongst transient homeless populations. But, working in modern hospitals, I've treated Americans with tuberculosis. I've been involved in their care, and it can happen. And that stuff spreads like wildfire, especially, we say it's in homeless, but if you're in a grid down type of scenario, living in tents or close proximity to others, like, these diseases are going to spread like wildfire. Now, the things I'm saying, I'm hoping you're kind of like picking some of this out, like, respiratory diseases, like, how am I going to deal with that? Like, can I isolate someone in the house and still care for them, right? Have you thought about like a sick room in the house? Have you thought about the ventilation in your house? Is it just circulating air? Is it going through a good HEPA or HIMER filter? These are the kind of things that I want you guys to kind of be thinking about in the back of your head as we go through these. Weeks to months, now you're looking at your long-term stuff is setting in. Malnutrition, localized epidemics, like your typhoids, pertussis, cholera, stuff like that. Meds are usually filled in like a 90-day supply with 3 refills, or 100 with 3 refills. Depending on where you're at in that cycle, like you may be running out of your blood pressure medication, or whatever other kind of meds you have. And if you're not able to get more of them, yes, you're probably going to be more physical and losing weight and being in better health. But some of these meds that people do need, thyroid meds, stuff like that, they're going to start running out of these meds, and they're going to start having these problems that are usually controlled by the medications. Chronic disease decompensation, so like your diabetics, patients with kidney disease, heart diseases, it's really going to start taking its toll on these guys as we enter the weeks and months without regular checkups and regular management and regular prescription fills, modern medicine working. Behavioral health, the vast majority of patients that I see on a daily basis are on some kind of antidepressant, antipsychotic, anxiolytic, some kind of behavioral health medication. The vast majority of people. And some folks are just going through a rough patch and need some help, need some chemical help with that, in addition to like talk therapy. Some folks are just chronically on this, and if they can't get their meds, they become suicidal, homicidal, all the above. When these folks are out of their meds, we used to have insane asylums, right? That's where we put these people before medications were developed and behavioral health treatment improved. But man, without access to those medications and those services, you were looking at the same exact problems that are going to come roaring back. All this to say, there's a lot of stuff that can be scary in this world with world events that are happening. What we can do to help prevent some of these, to help safeguard ourselves, our families. And medicine, I truly think, is one of the biggest ones. So, you don't have to go to the extremes. You can be an average person, an average citizen, work an average job, work a blue-collar job or whatever. And you can still have, I got some extra things here. So, like, some extra Tylenol, right? Fevers, aches, pains. Like, we had nurses that were calling out of work during COVID to stock up on Tylenol, right? So you can start at the very bottom of it, but having your basics like your Tylenols. You can EpiPens, things like that. Do you have extra EpiPens if you're you or your kiddo or whoever has an anaphylactic reaction to something? These are things that you can, generally get refilled pretty easily. I don't think I've ever, if a patient tells me that they have an anaphylactic reaction to bees, I don't think I've ever sent anyone to asthma allergy or anything like that to verify it. I'll just give you an EpiPen. I don't care. Not medical advice. You should always be honest. Yada, 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 yada. But, yeah, pretty much anyone can get their hands on that stuff. When I start talking about making friends and stuff like that, like if you yourself are not a prescriber, you can make friends with people who are, and you can start getting, stocking up deep on antibiotics and things like that. You may not necessarily need it yourself, but TXA, stuff like that. That's much more of your trauma care. But if you're working in community with a bunch of people, if you've got a group, and start making your friends, start pulling your resources, start getting stuff together. A box of trauma supplies here and there. All right, start getting your stuff together. It's going to be an interesting couple of years, I think. The U.S. is just undergoing all sorts of interesting cultural awakenings and changes. But guerrilla medicine, we're going to do so without the authorization of authority, if necessary, to do the best we can to care for our patients. That is the why. Touched on some of the reasons why we might need to know some of these things. Some real world examples that we've kind of derived from most recently COVID. You can look, Syrian civil war. You can look at, Helene. You can look at, Ukraine. You can look at all sorts of global examples. But I think COVID gives you a pretty good representation of things just kind of generally falling apart. And now, who knows, right? I saw it was like a Tim Pool video or whatever, and allegedly Civil War is like the most Googled topic, and that would be awful. And I really hope that doesn't come to fruition. But being able to treat some of your stuff at home, at least in urgent care level, hopefully you can avoid having to go out into any kind of a dangerous situation and just take care of some stuff at home. So I hope you guys got something out of this, as always. Let me know if this is worth doing or if this should be done in podcast form. I can always kick rocks and go back to podcast form. But wanted to get some of this stuff out in front of you guys. It's a weird world, and I think medicine is one of those things that you can do as an average citizen just to kind of be better prepared. All right, guys. Take care.